Like many people, I grew up going to church. I was very involved. I went to youth group, I sang in the choir, I even served as an altar girl. I prayed every night before I went to bed. This wasn't even actually something I was taught, but it was something that I wanted to do. There even came a point where my parents didn't want to go to church, but I was so determined I decided to drive myself. Then my focus changed. I started getting interested in boys, I started going to parties and drinking. Slowly, I stopped praying and I stopped going to church. I justified what I was doing. Everyone else was doing it. I was still a good person. The church had made their rules and now I was making my own. I knew that God was a loving God. He forgave sins, and as long as I was still a good person, I would make it to heaven. So after I had moved away to college, I was like, I need to go back to church. So I went to a campus service of a local church, and nobody talked to me, nobody said hi, and I felt very lonely, and I was like, this is not what I'm looking for. And so I never went back. So then one day, my sister called me. She lived up in New York, and she said she had just started going to a church, and it was amazing. She wanted me to go to the church that was a sister congregation by me. So I told her all churches are the same. Church is church. But she persisted, and I told her I would go. So the next day she called me. She's like, this is the name of the church. It's called the Tallahassee Church of Christ. This is the address. This is the phone number of the church office. She told me to call them and get the directions to the church. She said the secretary's name, and I was like, wow, she really, really wants me to go to church. I need to check this out. So then the night before church, I went to a party, and church came up in the conversation, which normally doesn't happen. I told them that my sister invited me to the Tallahassee Church of Christ. They said, I heard about that church. That church is a cult. And I was like, wow, what has my sister gotten into? I've got to check this out. So the next morning, I was called into work, and so I didn't make it to church. So then that evening, my sister called me and asked me how church was. And I explained to her what had happened on Saturday, how they told me it was a cult, and how work had called me in. I was like, it's kind of like God is telling me not to go to church. And she was like, why would God not want you to go to church? And she said, it might be Satan. Satan doesn't work in my life. Then she shared with me why she thought this church was different. She had shared that she had been using drugs, but it was because she studied the Bible and was baptized that she stopped. This was the first time she had ever shared that with me, and I was stunned. People don't just stop using drugs. I was like, this is amazing. Just cold turkey. She just made a decision to not do drugs again, and she stopped. I was like, wow, there is something to this. I need to see what this is about. So then the next week I went to church, and I was late, so I sat in the back, and then they stopped for a fellowship break. The woman in front of me turned around and talked with me. Now this was different than my old church, because in my old church, you just went in and nobody talked to anybody. So I was like really stunned that somebody would talk to me. So then she asked if I was meeting someone there, and I gave her the name of the secretary who had given me directions. She said she knew her. I was like, what, you know her? So she introduced me to her, who introduced me to some of the campus girls, and then we exchanged numbers, and they asked me to study the Bible. Now, the church that I grew up in never encouraged people to read their own Bibles. They said, you'll get enough of the Bible if you just come to church. So I didn't even own my own Bible, and I had always thought that people who study the Bible were Bible nerds. However, my sister said that she studied the Bible, and she was still cool, so I agreed. But then I had to leave. I was used to church being only 45 minutes, so I had to go to work. So then we got together and studied the Bible the next day. They convinced me that we should be urgent, so I studied every day for the next week. During my studies, I got upset. I thought if I was a good person, I thought I was going to heaven. No one had ever shown me what was actually in the Bible. I could have read it on my own, but I didn't think I needed to. I thought things like lying, cursing, sexual immorality, and drunkenness were bad, but I had no idea these were actual sins that were listed in the Bible. Society had me thinking these things were okay. Everyone was doing them. Instead, I learned through studying the Bible that Jesus took every one of my sins up on the cross so that I could be forgiven. I had known that Jesus had died for the sins of the world, but I had never really thought that Jesus died because I had sinned. And it was my sin that put Jesus up on the cross. It broke my heart when I realized that Jesus endured the excruciating pain of the cross because I decided to follow my own desires, even those things that left me empty. I found that what I was really looking for was a Savior, and that He was the only one that could satisfy the desires of my heart. So at the end of the week, June 26, 28 years ago, I made Jesus Lord of my life. So looking back, I see how I've always had a heart for God, but Satan did work in my life. He had me looking for love and connection from things that could only fill it temporarily. Jesus was the only one that could provide and fulfill the void that I was feeling. I'm grateful for my sister for being persistent in sharing her testimony. I'm grateful for the women who studied the Bible with me, women like Kim Hayes and Jennifer Lambert, who showed me that God had so much more to offer me than the emptiness that the world had to offer. I'm grateful to my friends, my husband, my family, who have helped me stay faithful and to keep me and help me grow to be more like Jesus every single day. I'm on a continual journey, and I'm hoping to make it to heaven where I can hear Jesus say, "Good, well done, my good and faithful servant." Thank you.